welcome everybody to another episode of EV Charging Minute. Thanks as always for joining us and being a part of the show. And as always, please leave your reviews and shares and all those things, and make sure you subscribe. And we can continue to bring you some information every week on how to improve commercial EV charging. And today I'm super excited. We have a guest joining me today, Jeremy Cohen, who is the Director of Real Estate Partnerships with Swtch. Jeremy, welcome to EV Charging Minute. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. This is great.
Awesome. So I know you have a lot of experience working with Swtch, and your focus is the large kind of real estate partnerships y'all have. So I'd love to talk about some lessons and just kind of dig into some of the challenges that are around the multi-property portfolios and stuff. And like, I know when you get involved, I'm sure that they have a lot of questions. And how do you guys kind of, what's your typical approach to something like
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So a lot of what I do at Swtch is work with developers and owners and operators of real estate across the country to help them with their EV charging strategy across their portfolio. And in my experience, no two owners or operators or developers are the same, especially when it comes to EV charging. How these groups work, how they think about deploying chargers at a portfolio level or at even a given asset completely.
That's what I was going to say. I bet there's a lot of challenges even getting down into each asset and dealing with the different aspects there as well, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You have some groups that have, beautiful building stock, a new portfolio, state of the art amenities and, electrical infrastructure galore. You have other groups that just happen to have older building stock, and that's their portfolio. And electrical capacity isn't really thought about because a lot of these buildings weren't thinking about EV charging, 10, 20, 30 years ago, whenever they were built. So, when we kind of go into a new property or we assess a portfolio, it's just like starting a brand new chapter on a book. It's never a dull moment.
Right, I bet. And do you so I would imagine you do the whole evaluation of like incentives and things for those people, and then try to what do y'all do is try to help to guide them to put them at the right place? Because I know we've run into owners that have ideas, and we kind of know a little better, and it's that's a tightrope to walk sometimes of telling your customer, no, we need to do this. I mean, I guess you have a lot of that you run into. And
For sure, for sure. There's so many ways that we look at it. I would say, macro level, we start from the top. So when we speak to an ownership group that has assets across the country, a lot of the things that we like to do is look at where those assets are located. One of the low-hanging fruits that we can go after out of the gate is identifying where these assets have incentive-rich areas.
right.
Utility companies that are being very generous with offering EV charging incentives, maybe state, maybe city, municipality, and then of course at the utility level. So that's a really good way to start to dwindle down where we can easily deploy chargers that just make sense for the budget. Because I think, one of the biggest things are, people say, yeah, we want to add chargers. We think we need a fast charger because that's what they're used to. And then you have an education of, well, what's the difference between a fast charger and a level 2 charger? And
Right.
level 2 chargers are for multifamily. Fast chargers are for major corridors along highways and retail shopping centers. So some of that is educational. And then, as we start to dwindle down and start to identify where we think we can really get chargers in the ground, it comes down to those incentive-rich areas, which are a great place to start. We look at data. Data tells a real big story.
Yeah.
We'll look at a given property. We like to engage with the property managers. A lot of times they have that data and say, listen, how many EV registrations are at this property? If you were to survey the property, how many EV cars, do you see in the lot? And, if there's a bunch of cars and there's zero chargers off out of the gate, these people are charging elsewhere, right?
Right, right.
So
That's what I was wondering, like how much you get involved on the local level to really dig into that property, because I could, that's where it really rubber meets the road, right? Like, and you could have a luxury apartment complex, but if you're in an area that there's not a whole lot of EVs, why go invest a lot of money unless there is incentives to save you today? But like, I would imagine you run into a lot, and I was wondering how much you might drill down into like surveying the residents and finding out, or does if it's a hotel, is the front desk keeping track of how many times they get calls for EV charging and stuff? Do you guys really dig down into that level with them?
Absolutely. I would say a little bit
Yeah.
of both. I think we
Yeah.
like to empower the local site managers, community managers, because they have the pulse with the residents, right? And
Hmm.
I think there is a difference if you're talking to a real estate group and we're going after these incentives. And, in order to get the incentives, you're looking to maximize the incentives that are out there.
Right.
Different conversation, right? Like if you're an ownership group or an operator and you're seeing the free money and you have to put, let's say, 10 chargers in at the property to get the full incentive, we say absolutely do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know when that free money is going to come back around. So grab it with both hands while it's there. Then you have the skeptic property manager that says, well, I think 10 chargers are going to be too much if we only have two EVs.
Yep.
So it's kind of like that delicate balancing act of just saying like, we are the experts. This is what we see every day. This is our recommendation. But at the end of the day, they say, well, I know my property better and there'll never be 10 EVs at this lot. So
Right.
maybe let's land in the middle and let's do six
Yeah.
chargers.
Yeah, no, we see a lot of the same things, like, and obviously right with you there on if there's incentives, like let's go grab everything we can on those incentives. I remember a couple of years ago, and this is just a note to everybody out there that's listening, don't sleep on these incentives. I had like 6 properties or 8 properties lined up in North Carolina a couple of years ago, and we were getting all their stuff together, and I kept telling them, look, this thing's going to close, and they waited. They all came back the next year like, hey, can we still get that? I'm like, no, sorry, North Carolina closed down their level 2 incentive program. Like there's still some power company stuff, but the big one at that time was they had a really good program and that they missed out. So definitely pay attention to that. So, in going through these evaluations and stuff, I know you talk about a lot of the stuff you look at, and on a big level, on a kind of a macro level for that property, that VP of assets or whatever that's in the property side, and the people that own all these things, what's your thoughts on how soon they need to get the right people involved? Like, a lot of times you might run into somebody like you said, oh, well, we want DC charging, and they don't know yet that they don't need that. Like what do you see? Like what do you run into, and what's your recommendation? Like, do you see a lot of people starting with their engineering firms, or?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I would say that question we could peel back the layer a few ways. I would
Yeah,
say
definitely.
when a lot of these groups are showing interest, I've seen it a couple ways. There's times where it's in the budget. So maybe, they've already budgeted for, a capital expenditure project of this nature and they're interested in doing it. There's times where there's leftover budget, from things that, amenity projects that maybe didn't go through. And then there's kind of, I would say, like the forward thinking aspect when you have these larger groups that have really proactive groups internally. So let's just say like directors of sustainability or innovation and strategy groups within these larger, let's say REITs, Fortune 500 type of companies. So you're getting internal champions, I would say, that want to push projects like this forward because they see the value.
Right.
This conversation of EV charging, I think, has shifted from being an amenity conversation to a revenue generation
Mhm.
conversation and true NOI conversation, and separating asset classes, as it pertains to what renters want. I think
Right.
in real estate, it's what's your competitive advantage? What's going to make someone lease building A or building B? And, these groups that are definitely bullish on making it happen are internalizing, saying, what does the modern resident want? And the modern resident wants to be able to park and charge their car where they live and work. They want to be able to walk their dog and have all the dog walking amenities.
Yep.
They want the steam, the sauna, the cold plunge. So, when you just kind of factor in this, these groups are just really looking holistically and say like, okay, we should deploy EV chargers. So, that's, I would say, the biggest conversation. And then two, it's getting the internal alignment going, because you can't just necessarily deploy chargers at scale at a given portfolio when it's a true CapEx.
Right.
So it's a lot of it is education, and
Hmm.
educating these groups as to the right areas maybe that we want to target. We spoke about the incentives earlier, but also, you have these states where there's just really high EV adoption and there's not necessarily the incentives to tag along.
Yeah.
So, states, let's just say like Florida, Texas, Arizona, these are states that are seeing enormous EV
Yeah.
adoption but have no incentives. So
Texas and Florida, we get that a lot. Like so many
yeah,
people, like I mean, and Texas is booming with it, and so is Florida. Like, and it's like, sorry, there's just no incentives, and everybody's like, well, I don't know if I want to do it, and it's like, and I want to wrap this. I want to drop back for a point if we can.
Yeah.
That's a really good point that you made there is how you're seeing that shift because I've noticed a lot of that too from it just being some amenity that's out there and how this has really become a more of a NOI driver and a property value add.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think some groups for a long time were thinking it as an amenity. Some groups were also uneducated in the power of what smart charging is. So they think they
Yeah.
have to pay for the electricity that's being dispersed and everyone's sucking up free energy. That conversation is out the window and now it's all smart technology, owners and operators really monetizing off the transactions, ensuring that maybe you're charging by the kilowatt hour versus
Right.
hourly to really recoup. So, that conversation has absolutely shifted and these chargers are being looked at, as true revenue drivers. And, the value of the software is you can look at how much revenue these chargers are generating on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And, sometimes they may be killing it, just
Yeah.
because you put the charger in the right location, you knew your clientele,
Yep.
and you control the pricing.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. We've seen like somewhere we've went in and replaced where they had free charging and they went to paid charging and they're like, a couple months later they're like, wow, we were making this kind of money now? Like what were we giving away before? And it's like, yeah, you don't you probably don't want to know that now how much you were giving away if you're making this kind of money off of it. But yeah, no, that's a good point because we're seeing that same kind of move now where, you know, years ago it was the early adopters, you could always count on them to do stuff, and then you had this whole like mix where people were still kind of amenity mindset on it, and it's like, well, I don't care about spending that kind of money for an amenity. And now we're seeing where people are like, yeah, you're right, this is an ROI driver. So that's great. It sounds like getting involved early is a key here for any. I know we try to do that too. I ran into a project not too long ago. We got drawings from a multifamily location, and the engineer had designed a parking deck with some chargers in it, and he had a single 200 amp panel. And right now he had like two chargers in it, but he had a whole that was to charge future up to like 30 chargers, and it's like, and it was doing the house lighting and the house,
Mhm.
cord. And I was like telling the contractor that I said, this is we got a little bit of a problem here. I mean, this is not enough to do what you want to do long term. I said, you'll be okay with the two you're putting in right now, but so I would imagine like getting involved early like that really helps on that kind of side too, especially with power management and things like that. We can help the engineers. I know we try to do that. So
Absolutely. And I even think too, it's like two different conversations when you're talking like new development versus
yeah,
retrofit. The new development, it's just so great. You have building code. Some
yeah,
states and cities, are requiring X amount of EV chargers for, make ready and then future proofing. So, those engineers, it's beautiful. It kind of gives them a blank canvas, if you will, of just putting like an EV dedicated panel so you can just keep adding.
keep adding and then yeah, I mean because we all know being on our side of this, we know that you don't need that an overnight charge doesn't necessarily need to have 11 kilowatts all night long, right? We know we can spread that around and serve a lot more than one charger with that, that side. So it's good for them to, so obviously to everybody out there, the sooner that you can get involved with a company like Swtch to help you out and understand all that, it's great. So with all that stuff going on, I'm sure there's a lot more that you kind of wrap up. I'd love to just kind of put a bow on this of like that whole deployment plan, like we talked about. Like I know we kind of once it starts the like, okay, we did all the evaluation and now it's that. Now we got to go into the whole other side of this of the construction side, right? Like now we're bringing out the jackhammers and we're crawling through people's buildings. I would imagine that gets pretty crazy too. Do you guys like, I'm sure you have a whole system of that and some good stories there as well, right?
Oh yeah, I call it, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Uh-huh.
And it's, for us, we like to align ourselves with national install groups, localized regional groups. We don't pretend to be experts in the physical installation because Switch is a software and a
Right.
hardware company as a whole. So, really aligning yourself with these experts who, one, know how to work with the DOB, know how to pull permits, know when you're boring, when you're running wires and conduits, and, you're running communication gear throughout garages. I mean, really working with the right group that does this every day within a localized area is so big, and also that's where, project timelines just start to get extended.
Yeah.
Sometimes you run into something you were not anticipating, at all. So I think, for that, when you're looking at after you've done the analysis and we decided how many chargers, you're really carving out, a couple days to get a job done. You got to make
Right.
sure that say residents aren't parking in the garage so that way the crews can come in and do what they need to do, or vice versa on a surface parking lot. I ran into one recently. We were reviewing plans and this was a retrofit, and it was told to us that the water table was like very close to where we were thinking about installing EV chargers, and that crew is about to go in there very soon. Boom,
Right.
the delay. You can't have the electrical guys going in there close to the water guys. So,
Right. Right.
you just never know what's going to happen. And, the permit approvals is a whole nother beast. And so, I think it's one of those where you plan for the worst and you hope for the best.
Right.
And
Right.
the most beautiful thing is a project gets done in, 1, 2, 3 days, however many chargers you're deploying, and they're active and they're commissioned and they're energized and we're up and running. But, really aligning with groups that do this in a local area has been very big for us. Just because again, it takes a village to get these.
Yeah, it does. And my background, I came for years in construction, so I know how important that local knowledge is, right? Like we did nationwide construction, but you needed those local people, and they make a huge difference on the success of your projects. Like just knowing those permit people and everything else, they can get things done that others can't. So that's always a good thing. And then I would imagine that, like, so now we got everything deployed, and you guys are still there, right? Like you're still there with your portfolio going on throughout the management of these things, right? Like that's kind of the next phase of that is once you kind of get them up and running, the right service provider like you guys, you're going to be there behind it and stand behind this, right? I mean, that kind of that's all part of your plans as well in your deployment.
Yep, absolutely. Once those chargers are in the ground and they're energized and they're commissioned, we're working with the on-site team or the national team, whoever is really involved in that decision-making process to, really get these chargers up and running and being monetized. A lot of what we
Right.
do is kind of handhold these groups to help them, model their margins, if you will. I know I touched upon this earlier, but, we'll say, hey, listen, like, you have the option to charge by the kilowatt hour. You can charge by the hourly rate. You can enforce loitering if someone's hogging the charger, and I call it the
Yeah.
kick in the butt, time to get off the charger. You can go reservation systems. You can decide, how much you're charging. And a lot of what we do is, just glean from a lot of the data that we have from our clients as well as what's being charged locally. So that way,
Locally, right.
listen, here's what your energy bill is from your local utility company. Here's what we're seeing across our portfolio. Here's what we think you should charge. So one, you're covering your cost of electricity while also making a little margin off of each transaction.
Right. And then I'm sure you can share what you see other properties doing promotion wise and things like that. Because like you said, it's not just, and I always say this too, it's not, you just don't just build them. Like you need to let people know. Like if you have an apartment complex, you need to let the residents know they're there. Don't just hope they happen to see them when they drive by and how it all works and stuff like that.
Yep, and even going back to that education piece, I know when our onboarding team is working, with the local site team to get these up and start the monetization, it's also sending out like really informal videos. Just here's how to use the charger, here's how to get set up on the Swtch app and set up your account, your
Yeah.
digital wallet, and here's who to call or email if the charger happens to go down. So you install this brand new toy and it's this bright and shiny object and everyone wants to use it and they go, well, how do I use it?
Yeah. Yep.
It's just a lot of education through that. And I think once people start to see just how easy the experience is, then it just becomes second nature in their day to day. And then they think like, how did I live without this thing? It becomes like,
Right. Yep.
it's like their cell phone that doesn't leave their pocket.
Yeah, no doubt. And then I'm sure, now we got everything running, you guys probably help them as well on paying attention to the future and, demand that's happening on the chargers and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's one of the values of being on a network like Switch. You see how much they're being used, so you can help them make informed decisions of like, hey, you've got more residents with charging now, and these things are overbooked, right? I mean, that's something I'm sure you can point out and help.
Exactly right, Tony. Exactly right. Our customer success team does a really good job of monitoring all the chargers on the network. Of course, dealing, with, potential client inquiries, but a lot of what they do is they will comb through the data, quarterly or annually, and then they'll reach back out and, say, hey, Mr. Property Owner, like we installed 4 chargers about 2 years ago, and these are seeing really high utilization rates.
Right,
We're going to guess by the utilization rates that a lot of people maybe wait. So maybe it's
right,
a good time to install, 2 to 4 more because they're really seeing the usage. So they do just a really good job of just staying on top of that and tracking that type of data because it's
right.
all stuff that you can glean from the Swtch portal.
Exactly. So you got the data, so it's good that they've got, these your partners have somebody watching out for them and paying attention because you don't know. And then the last thing you want in your charging thing is I always tell everybody like the last thing you want, you put this thing in, you don't want it to be a headache for somebody, and you don't want somebody, especially if you're monetizing this thing, you don't want to find out that your residents or your guests or customers are mad because they have to wait or they can't get a charge tonight because you're monetizing this thing and it's making you money. So of course you want to put 4 more in, when the time's right. You don't want to overbuild in the beginning, but you certainly don't want to wait too long to keep that demand there and satisfy it.
Completely. And I think, a lot of these groups who are just really savvy, they naturally see the ROI. So, whether that initial, we'll call it tranche, was offset by, let's just say, incentive programs, and
Right.
they got that free money and that CapEx project was significantly lower. But if they're really seeing the utilization on these things, and let's say they had 4 chargers out of the gate, to add another two, yes, they're not going to get the free money, for the CapEx,
Right.
but they're actually seeing in real time the revenue that's being generated. So they can internalize and say, yes, maybe the payback period is going to be a little longer, but they
Right.
are
Right.
really being used.
I don't have that great incentive that gave me a 6 month payback period on this one, but I can see by what we're doing, at least I'm not going to be out for 7 years waiting for my money to come back, right? And
Exactly.
and that's, I mean, I'm sure you run into this too. Like that's always the driver that we see all the time with most of these commercial real estates is like, what's that ROI time and how do we drive that? And so,
We have actually a real funny story. We were doing a deployment in the Hudson Valley in New York, and it was a multifamily complex, and our guys were there on site, and we were installing the chargers, and there wasn't a lot of EVs in the lot at the time. So I think we were deploying probably about four, and one of the residents happened to be seeing the install and went up to the crew and said, like, "Are you guys installing EV chargers?" And I was like, "Yeah." He actually went out the next day and bought an
I
EV.
bought one.
He's like, I've
Yeah,
been waiting for this moment. You've made my life so much easier. So it's like just really cool to see in real time because you're doing
absolutely.
this work, and just to see the excitement of that happening was
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, that's cool. We had something similar happen at a senior living community.
Hmm.
They put two in, and there was a couple people that had cars, electric cars, and since then more and more keep buying them. Like, and we get more and more people going in, they're like, oh yeah, we got these chargers in the community now. It's perfect. And so yeah, it's funny how the on-site charging drives more sales of, more people to buy the EVs. It's kind of funny, a little reverse of the scenario there.
Yeah, you hear it. If you think you've been in the industry long enough, you always hear it, right? It's like the chicken or the egg. It's like, are you
Uh-huh.
putting chargers first and then people buying the cars second, or vice versa? And I don't know the true answer, honestly. And you could see different articles for years and years. I'll just tell conflicting things, but
Oh yeah.
I think of it like I joke with my wife. I say sometimes I feel like we're the guys who were building the early railroads because you were just putting in this infrastructure that was just going to help expansion. And
Right.
we're just putting in infrastructure that is not currently there to just help the ease of like automotive transition, you
Yeah,
know?
to the whole thing, and like yeah, I feel the same way, I'm sure we could share stories on that forever. But I tell everybody, like the EVs are here to stay. They're not going away. You'll hear all kinds of stories up and down and good and bad, whatever. I don't get in the middle of that, but they're not going away. It's a good product and it's a good experience for people to drive. And so I see that, I kind of feel the same way. We're helping that infrastructure grow and get it out there. So.
Completely. It's fun.
Yeah, so man, I know we could sit and probably chat for a while a bit more, but I know we need to wrap this up. One thing I love to do at the end, like give you a chance to just tell a little story, help connect with the, guests, whether it's something about you learned in the EV space or a nice little story you want to tell, anything like that you'd love to share with the audience, just a little tidbit or anecdote about Jeremy.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, Jeremy loves what he does. I really get to sit at the intersection of real estate and technology. And I think what I really love most about Swtch is just the product offering. And the product offering allows us to go into any type of building, residential, commercial, mixed use, industrial, you name it, and be able to still deploy chargers at scale without having to do infrastructure upgrades. So, as someone who is kind of there as the consultant and the advisor, when you're dealing with a lot of these groups and they say, well, we have no electrical capacity, it's not necessarily true,
Right.
because what these chargers are able to do, they're smart enough to speak to each other. Swtch has an incredible product called Swtch Control, which allows us to install a panel metering device essentially for advanced load management and still deploy chargers. So it makes my conversations with these groups really exciting and really seamless, because it might turn a skepticism or a no into, wow, that's really interesting. How do we do it?
Right.
So
That's great, and it kind of moves that 800-pound gorilla in the room and kind of makes him a lot smaller. Like, because I know anybody on an asset class is like, man, this is infrastructure. It costs money, right? Like, so that's
exactly.
great to hear.
Exactly. You just kind of have this shifting conversation of, no, we don't need to do these huge capital projects just so you can put in, a few chargers. So
Yeah.
I think it makes what I do much easier and have just really nice conversations. And, it's been really fun to just see the growth of Swtch. We just are so
Right.
fortunate for the growth that we've seen, the incredible real estate clients that we service, and just to really deploy these chargers at scale across, North America. So it's been really fun, Tony, and I really
Awesome.
appreciate the conversation and the questions. This was
Yeah,
easy.
me too. I really appreciate that as well. And I like how you wrap that up is great because it just, any of the listeners out there know they hear me talk about it all the time, how important it is to work with a good service provider in this. And obviously Swtch is one of the best out there. So you guys need to, if you're doing anything with EV charging, they're definitely one that needs to be on that checklist that you talk to and work with, at least get, make sure you're talking to them and finding out what they can bring to the table with you. So that was great. Let's wrap this up here. Can just share how everybody can get a hold of you, and like I said, you guys out there, if you're deploying EV charging or looking at it, Jeremy's definitely one of the ones you got to reach out to and talk to about this stuff. So, Jeremy, how can everybody get a hold of you, and what's the best way to do all that?
Appreciate it, Tony. Yeah, feel free to reach out for any of the listeners interested. Shoot me an email. It's jeremy.cohen@switchenergy.com. There's no I in Switch.
Right, and we'll share that in the notes as well to everybody. I'll make sure that in the show notes you'll see that in there so you can get his email directly there. So again, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here, and maybe another year or so we'll do this again and find a new topic to talk about. I enjoyed having you here to share some knowledge, and that wraps us up, everybody. I hope everybody got some new knowledge today. Everybody have an amazing weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks again, Tony.